Well, hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us live here on this segment of Tech Beat today. Beautiful, warm summer day here in downtown Salt Lake City. I'm glad to be joined by my distinguished guest, Dan Beck, co-founder of 401Go, among several other ventures that we'll talk a little bit more about today. And I'm going to come back around and introduce Dan officially, but quickly just wanted to run through a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, whatever platform you're joining us from, you can interact with us through the comments on that platform or chat on that platform. Dan and I will keep an eye on those items throughout the hour here, and if you've got some cool comments and questions, we'll try to get to those. Worst case scenario, we should be able to open up the end of the hour here for 10 or 15 minutes for any entrepreneurial, leadership, branding, marketing, sales related questions, whatever you have, that you want to ask of Dan or myself. We'll be happy to open up some time at the end of the hour and get to those questions. My name is Earl Foote, by the way. I'm founder, CEO of Nexus IT Consultants. We are an outsourced IT support, cybersecurity, and cloud firm based here in northern Utah and serve a nationwide footprint. Just for everybody's, just keep everybody in the loop on upcoming segments happening here over the next several weeks. I've got Josh Weber, co-owner of Big Red Jelly, who's going to be joining me. That's actually on July 7th. So a week and a half or so from now, or 2 weeks, I think, from now. Josh is going to be sharing a little bit about the story of how they pivoted during COVID and how that's been a massive, how it's led to a massive increase in their business. I've got Christy Holt joining me, founder, CEO of Vibonics. Christy's a super dynamic, engaging individual, a very interesting female leader that I really enjoy, collaborating with and having a friendship with. So look for information on that, as well as Stephanie Page coming up as well. So keep an eye out for announcements on those segments that will be happening over the next 6 or 8 weeks. So again, thank you for joining us. Welcome here. I want to introduce my guest, Dan Beck, here today. Dan, driven by insatiable curiosity, has launched numerous businesses in a variety of industries. Dan loves the creativity and excitement of starting companies and building brands. His approach to startups center around the application of emerging technologies with an emphasis on strategic marketing. After multiple successful exits, Dan's focus has shifted to helping hardworking Americans prepare for retirement and enabling small businesses to proactively help their employees work toward financial freedom. And that is through his current venture of 401Go. So Dan, thank you again for joining me today, my friend. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm glad to be here. So excited.
This is going to be a fantastic hour. You're a guy that I've really enjoyed getting to know over recent months. I wish we'd known each other. I wish I could say we've known each other for many years. But you've been an engaging, fun individual who's always had tons of insight as we've had interactions over recent months. And so I'm so happy to have you here with me today. So I know our chosen topic here, is leveraging some of your past entrepreneurial experience and talking about brand building and really establishing your voice, how you communicate that voice, your values, and building a loyal following, which that's one of the principal challenges of any venture, of any business, is really understanding and creating those items. And so before we kind of dig deeper into that topic though, Dan, I think it'd be valuable for the audience to get to know you a little bit more as a person, get to know your story and your journey a little bit more. So maybe just fill us in on who you are, what kind of things you like to do, where you grew up, how you got to where you are now, and sure, help us understand your entrepreneurial journey, up to this point.
Yeah. So I think for me, really, it boils down to just curiosity. And I've got, kind of a creative side where I have to be making something. I grew up with a wood shop in my basement, and that was kind of like my first building of things. It was taking, wood and turning into something, and I learned how to weld. And so I was very, hands-on, literally with creating things. And so for me, that fulfilled a lot of those kind of like creative ambitions. And then as I, kind of progressed through high school and college and was trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, I'm still working on that. I found that entrepreneurship was a great way to kind of continue to develop that, those creative abilities, as well as satisfy just my curious nature. It's everywhere I go. When I look at, and it's certainly evolved more, especially now having deeper insights into the various businesses that I've been involved in. It's almost like you have, kind of like some 3D vision when it comes to looking at businesses. And I can't help but go into a restaurant and sit down and like try to figure out how much money are they making here. And, so for me, it's just it's being able to satisfy kind of those, like, the highest, hierarchy of needs, that self-actualization. And for me, it doesn't really, if you look at the different businesses that I've been in, it hasn't been, in one industry or one vertical. Kind of my first career, if you will, was in video productions. And I think the thing that I loved about that most was, like, in producing TV shows, as a producer, a photographer, editor, or whatever role it was that I had, for the given project. I got to interact with people of all different disciplines. And so, I got to interview, CEOs at very large and well-known companies. And so it just gave me very broad exposure to just a lot of information, a lot of topics. And so I really enjoyed that. And just over the course of doing that for just a little bit shy of a decade, I kind of got burned out a little bit creatively, from a creativity standpoint. Between travel and when you're working on your own creative vision, it's one thing. When you're working on somebody else's, some of the time that's a little bit harder to do. And so I decided that, it was kind of time to set out and have a more active role in building businesses and just trying to express my creativity in other ways. And and so looking back at it, I've been involved in a food truck, construction company, video productions, logistics, products, outdoor sporting good products. And throughout all of these, I think, some of the big, the big takeaways for me is it really came down to at the core, I'd say I'm a marketer, building brands, and just really, how that evolves. And I feel like a lot of those same principles are true, whether, it's a service-based business like IT consulting or a product-based business like some of the ones that I've been involved in the past. And so, for me, marketing's kind of just at the core of who I am professionally. And outside of the professional side of things, when you look at the hobbies, it's very similar to what I've done professionally. I collect hobbies. So I'm very into aviation. I learned how to paraglide, a couple decades ago, and I got my private pilot's license about 6 years ago. So I love flying. I love adventure, traveling, scuba diving. I've gotten into sailing recently. So beekeeping, woodworking. So a very, very diverse set of hobbies that, again, I just find something I was like, wow, that's fascinating. And I have to immerse myself in it to really, gain exposure to it. And it's just the way that I learn. It's the way that I satisfy that creativity.
Yeah, I've seen that with you in crypto as well.
Yeah.
Definitely latched on and, found that very fascinating and interesting. And
Yep.
certainly yourself and Scott Paul and Kyle Ivins are more well-versed than myself. I mean, I know crypto well enough because, of course, we had to start helping companies pay ransom with Bitcoin, 15 or so years ago.
Sure.
And so we've had to become, familiar with it, but I've never dug as deep into all the different, cryptocurrencies and all the intricacies and stuff, that you and Scott and I and Kyle seem to, know about. So just, a couple of quick, observations and comments. First of all, it's interesting how similar our journeys are in that both of us have this insatiable kind of desire for creation, for having some sort of creative outlet. And so when I was younger, I actually was a pretty decent artist, sketch and oil and acrylic paints. And I originally was, kind of thought I would be an artist. And then I think my parents kind of talked some sense into me and said, like, you know, artists, artists don't make money, right? And so
Yeah.
I kind of leaned towards and started studying, architecture, which led me into engineering, and then that led me into, into technology ultimately. But for me, I've had to figure out how to continue to have creative outlet in entrepreneurship, because, I kind of left that art creativity behind, other than music. I read, like, in my late teens, I really started to latch into, onto music a little bit more. Because you've come to see us, and I appreciate that, but, I'm in a band. And so outside of the office, I try to still have some creative outlets, but also, like you, try to figure out how to have some creative outlets, inside, the office as well. You mentioned a comment here, and it's funny for me because I think I drive my family nuts when we go to, like, dinner, or we go to, a theme park or something like that, because I totally try to completely tear apart the operations, and, like, this is what's working well for them. This isn't what, this is what's not working well. Let's figure out, how much they're making off of, each head here, and, like, totally try to figure out the business model and reverse engineer everything. And I'll be like, okay, well, notice how they're doing this, and this is great. This is really good. But this, you got to, take a look at this, and this isn't working for them, and stuff like, I think that, they're like, that, just shut up. Like, let's talk business right now.
Yep. Yeah, I was at a it's everywhere. Like, even my daughter, she did gymnastics for a while, and Jolly's Gymnastics, they're a very big company outfit here along the Wasatch Front. And I was always amazed because they would do, like, these, I think it was once or twice a year, these recitals, and they had to rent out a high school auditorium just because of how big their operation is. And I would look at the the publication or whatever of this is the many teams, and I kind of counted up and realized, wow, they do this 4 times a week. And so, I'd equate in their head. I turned to my wife, I'm like, how much do we pay? And she's like, what's going on? Because I'm trying to quantify the numbers, and it blew me away, that even a small business is really, they're doing millions of dollars. And it's very impressive to see just how somebody takes something and can scale it. It's exciting. I think it's fun.
Yeah. And I guess the reality on the backside of that, though, for those of us that have gone through, one venture or even multiple ventures, is that oftentimes the outside perception of the cost of operations is grossly different than what the reality is, right?
Yeah.
Being in business is expensive. Like, there's just an infinite amount of never-ending expenses and opportunities to spend money, right? And you have to figure out, where does it make sense to spend that money, and where does it not make sense? Because obviously your objective in business is to keep while providing amazing products and or services and customer service, is to keep your operating costs low so that you can keep your margins, healthy, and reinvest into your business, and obviously make sure that you're compensating your people well and all that. Yeah. It's a delicate balance, man, and it's really kind of interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about starting to dig into your journey of branding. So tell us a little bit, Dan, about what your first idea was and how you decided upon brand there and started to bring that to market.
Sure. So really kind of the first brand that I built, and I've exited from this company, and when I look back on it, about 90% of the the price that I sold the business for, it was a good exit, was related purely to what accountants call goodwill. So essentially all the intangible aspects of the business. So the book value, so the inventory, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and everything else, represented about only 10 to 12% of the overall value for which I sold the company. And so to me, like, that's a real testament to the power of a brand. And the reason that, I even had the possibility of selling this to, a larger conglomerate was because they recognized the value of that brand. So the company was TechMat, and it was really just kind of a very random idea, to be honest, like a lot of good businesses are, where, at the time, I was still doing video productions, and just kind of as like a side hustle of, that I always had going on. I was producing, like these mouse pads, and I put different designs on them. And I'd sell them on eBay. So I had like all the keyboard shortcuts for Final Cut Pro and all the Adobe suite of tools. And at one point I thought, oh, well, firearms are cool. Let me do some exploded view diagrams of firearms. Cause, again, I love engineering and, that sort of kind of scientific thinking. And so I thought these look great. And then I started getting feedback, and people were saying, well, this is cool, but it's too small to clean my gun on. And so, that kind of evolved into what, TechMat was, which is, it's essentially, it's a glorified large mouse pad that shows you how to disassemble, clean, and reassemble your firearm. I remember when I first started selling that and kind of those first experiences of putting it up on eBay and Amazon, and overnight waking up to, several $1,000s in sales, I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. Because prior to that, it was, as a service-based industry, I was always trading time for money. And the only way that I kind of like increased, my income was to buy someone else's time, which I would then in turn sell for more money. And so this was really kind of my first like aha moment when it came to a product-based business. I remember like at, kind of the very first wholesaler that I set up, she told me at the time, she's like, oh, this is $1 million idea. I'm like, oh, thanks. That's so sweet. But I don't think so. It turns out she was right. It turned out to be kind of a fun little venture. And to be honest, it's, I didn't even own a firearm at the time. So it's not like I was, super tuned into this opportunity. It's just that, I saw something that I thought was cool, and, the customers latched onto it, and it kind of grew from there. Since I started that company, later on, about halfway through my time or tenure of owning that brand, I saw some kind of competitors come on the scene and try to mimic and do the same thing. And that's where really kind of that value of a brand hit home, to where, they came in and I had really good margins. Like the unit economics for that product were phenomenal. So I certainly enjoyed that. And the thing too is, as new entrants kind of came into the space and competitors came in, part of the reason and thinking when I first got into that was, I'm like, if I build in a lot of margin, it allows me to, cut costs or cut price should I need to, as there's more competition. And because I had such a valuable brand, I didn't have to do that. Because that price signaled the quality, and at the same time I had to make sure that we delivered on that. And so it was more than just, and that's again for like a product-based business, it extends well beyond just the product itself. It's the customer service, it's the messaging that goes along with it, it's everything that represents that company and that brand. And to turn something as simple as a mouse pad into, something that's kind of more of a lifestyle element for somebody that's really into, the Second Amendment or firearms or, hunting, whatever it may be. And that's essentially what we did. That was kind of the first brand that I built. And then along the way, just having, again, exposure to that particular, vertical within the outdoor sporting goods industry, kind of the hook and bullet crowd, it just opened up more possibilities. And, so I created a kind of a tactical bag line, 3V gear, that, we also created another brand for water filters, Renova Water and Hydro Blue. I've sold those. For SETI Steel, which is kind of, again, it's one of those things where I was at a trade show and I saw this really cool knife, and I was talking to the guy and he's like, yeah, this is Damascus steel. And I had no clue what Damascus steel was at the time.
Yeah.
And as I started to look into it, I was like, wow, this is really fascinating, and like, I feel like I'm, a fairly informed consumer, especially within the space. And the fact that I didn't know something, I didn't know this existed, to me said that there's a market opportunity. And so, we kind of got into that, brand as well. And it's been very fun too, to really explore all these businesses that in many ways they're experiments. So with TechMat, distribution was very typical of what you would find with any brand. Like we had, 90% of our sales were through wholesalers. So we had distributors, we had reps around the country and salespeople. We were selling into the big box stores like Cabela's, Bass Pro, and it was just, traditional distribution. We sold a little bit online, direct. And then with 3V Gear, we launched in that same manner. And I didn't like the way, by the time the product got to the customer's hands, I didn't like the overall experience that they encountered. I didn't like a lot of the friction that was being created. And so I kind of tried this whole direct to consumer approach with 3V Gear that was, at the time it's much more common, but early on it was a little bit more experimental. And just had a lot of fun of really understanding and owning that kind of customer experience from the beginning to end, instead of really relying on distribution partners to provide that full customer experience. We wanted to do that ourselves. And so with each of these brands, I tried, Kickstarter and, a bunch of different distribution models. But for me, every business has been far more experimental than, it wasn't like, oh, we've had really good success here, let's just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. I get bored with that. So it was like, okay, let's try something new now. Oh, this Kickstarter thing looks really cool. I want to try to run a Kickstarter. So we've tried a lot in that space, and it's been a lot of fun, and the things that, kind of what I term as branding, or like those core marketing principles, they've stayed true. The distribution, the tactics, those change, but branding and like those core marketing principles, they've been consistent throughout, everything that I've been involved in.
Very fascinating, man. So a couple of things that I think that you continue to mention, maybe, not in specific words, but the concept of, you really have to, in order to begin to build a brand, you really need to understand your client. You need to understand what they want, what they're looking for, what the market is, and what your opportunities are there. Is that a fair interpretation of some of what you've expressed?
Yeah. So for me, I feel like it's important to have what I call a feedback loop. And it's one of those things where, even as, TechMat grew in size and we became more and more detached from the end customer, I still made every effort to go to, trade shows and industry shows, to talk to, and events, to talk to customers and really find out here are the problems that they have, but also understanding that the customer isn't just the end person that actually owns the product, but everybody that participates in the supply chain as well. And how do they, what are some of the problems that they're running into, and how do I fix that? Because again, as you start to have competitors in your space, if your product's far easier to distribute, or your service is far easier to buy, then you can win on factors beyond just price. And I think for a lot of people, they just think, oh, I can make it cheaper. But that's always a losing proposition. So for me, like, being able to complete that feedback loop is imperative, because, marketing and branding for me isn't just about like selling more or the messaging or the outward appearance, but like with 401Go, over the last year, I've really focused. I've had tons of conversation with small businesses, with a lot of our, financial advisors who are distribution partners, to really understand, like, what are the challenges that you run into? What are the challenges that the small businesses that need these 401k plans are running into? What are the questions that they're asking? And so as I've completed that feedback loop, it's helped me, better enhance my messaging. It's led to product enhancements. And so, again, it's a way that, product branding, marketing, that feedback loop has done a lot more than just enhance sales and marketing. It's gone all the way down to the product level. So we've been able to make product improvements based off of that. And, prior, when I was in a very, kind of consumer product space, we'd have focus groups when we were developing products. We had product development committees that people would join, and we'd solicit feedback that way. And that's always valuable, but I feel like, it's important, even if you're the CEO of a big company, to like go down into the call center, and spend some time picking up the phones and finding out what challenges people are having. Because as you start to, grow the organization and layer on, levels of individuals, processes, distribution channels, whatever it is, it kind of creates like some insulation between you and the end customer. And I feel like that's where a lot of brands, kind of lose focus, and they end up being something that they shouldn't be, is because everything starts to be driven more from an accounting perspective or leadership perspective, or what's, most conducive from kind of an administration standpoint, than it is like, this is what the customers really need. So for me, I love finding these boutique brands, these companies that are probably, $1 to $5 million in annual revenue, that just really connect with their customers and their message resonates. And they, that the people that are answering the phone, the people that are fulfilling the products, the ones that are making the product decisions, like they live and die by, the product or whatever it is that you're into. And so to me, I feel like more and more that is becoming the experience. Those are the products that people want. I want something more than just, a guitar I can hang on my wall. I want something more, like I want an experience. Consumers are looking for an experience, and a story that relates to that product, much more than just being able to check a box and say, hey, I have this item, and that's, that serves its need.
Yeah, really, really good advice. Wise words. Lots of good stuff there. I really like, how you talked about, even if you're a CEO of a large organization, you need to figure out how to not isolate yourself from, the customer feedback loop. And really very interesting how you mentioned that your customer isn't just the end customer, the end user of, whatever product or services that you're providing. It's everybody in that supply chain. If you make it easier, quicker, faster, more profitable, for your distribution partners, whatever those look like, to sell your product and or service versus somebody else's. And I see this happen in our own business all the time of, solution providers who want to come to us and have us add their solutions, products, services, whatever, to our portfolio, right? And the quicker, easier that they make it for us, the more likely it is that we're going to adopt it, and that our clients are going to adopt it, and it's going to begin to translate into some revenue for them and for us, right? When it's cumbersome, and there's lots of hoops to go through, and it's hard to get pricing, and it's hard to then, the likelihood of anybody adopting it is just significantly less. So you have to that's really smart to mention. You've got to keep in mind that every, notch there in your supply chain, they are your customer, and you have to figure out how to solve the challenges and make it easier and quicker for them to sell your products and services. Really, really good points, man. We wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between a product and a brand. I realize that sometimes people get these confused. You might look at, Nike, for example, right? And you think that the shoe is the brand, right? But not really. The brand is Nike with the swoosh, but the shoe is the product, right? So talk to us a little bit, about those distinctions.
So really, I think probably the easiest way to describe the difference is it's all the intangibles that are associated with it. So it's the, and I've always, it's been difficult, especially with how political and divided I feel like our environment is right now, that you see businesses getting involved in politics, and a lot of people stay out of politics, but in a way, it's a manifestation of the brand. It's a manifestation of the values and everything that they believe in. And I feel like more and more, as consumers have access to more information, and as we see, influencers being used more for distribution, and, Instagram and all these different influences that we have as a consumer, that we care a lot more about the intangibles than we ever did before. And so, when you're buying a pair of shoes, you need something that you can run in, or something that you can play basketball in, or whatever it is that shoe is designed for. But, there's a dozen manufacturers that have that. And so, and for relatively the same price point. So the really big, determining factors are those brands. And the thing too is, if you're looking at everything, and if your marketing is purely product focused, then every time, even if you have 1,000 products, every time you win a customer, just on product values and product attributes or features alone, you're going to have to win them over and over and over and over again. Whereas if you win them on brand, then they're likely going to stay with you. And so, if you buy a pair of shoes, then the likelihood of you buying other athletic apparel from them, or services, they have an app now that I used during COVID that they actually made free. So the Nike Training Club, and there's a lot of ways that they're adding value beyond just the products themselves. And I think in a service-based business as well, such as yours, there's a lot more intangibles, because at the end of the day, when somebody buys, something from your company, it's not necessarily, sure, it could be a piece of hardware that gets plugged into a rack or something like that, but it's everything else that goes into it. And so I think a lot of companies, they lose touch. And I think that, just walk down the aisle in Walmart, and a lot of the products that you see there have been highly commoditized, where it's just a set of features and who can deliver that for the least amount of money possible. But where people really want to shop, I feel like, is where those intangibles have a lot more value. And so that's where you find companies like Patagonia that are taking a stance when it comes to environmental issues, or you find companies that are starting to really manifest those values, and do so boldly. Like, to me, that's good branding. It's really communicating like what, and people start to buy into what I call more of a lifestyle. So, I think in a lot of ways, like, you've done a very effective job of making, kind of your company lifestyle. I know that as I've interacted with, the various team members that you work with, that they all, like, it's not that this is Earl, and this is Annika, like, they all, you all have a very, I think, similar style. And to me, that's branding. Like, it's those intangibles, it's those interactions, and knowing that, you've clearly done work, whether that was something intentional or just kind of more passive. It's impressive, and you see that. And to me, when you find, and I think small companies do that really well, it's as companies scale in size that it's easy to lose touch, because you don't have people, you start to get departments in between where it's like, oh, the guys in the warehouse, they think this way, the marketing teams thinks that way, and there's not as much, like, when you're a small company, everybody's doing a little bit of everything. When a container shows up, everybody's back unloading it, but as the company grows, that starts to shift. And I think that's where it's really more important to understand how your values are being communicated through branding as a whole.
Yeah, really great. So you mentioned, the fact that in today's market, consumers, and even if that consumer is a business, right? If it's business to business services or business to business products, or technology, platforms or whatever, or if it's, consumer products, consumers in today's market, they don't really want to interact with faceless businesses without a story. Mm-hmm. Like, they want, and it's the reason why, for example, I would say, Apple is a perfect illustration of this, or you mentioned Patagonia, or here in our own backyard, Cotopaxi, mm-hmm. and there's many, of course, hundreds of brands that we could key in on that have done such a great job of selling the brand and the story and the face of that brand, that they create. If you've ever read the book Zombie Loyalist, and that's one I'd recommend to the audience. I really enjoy that book, but they create people that or consumers that are so loyal to their product that even when they mess up, they're far more forgiving usually. Like, they let things happen and roll because they're invested in more than just a set of features or just a product. They're invested in the story. They've got an emotional attachment there that they've bought into, and they've spent money because of that emotional attachment. Mm-hmm. I will say that, and maybe this is inaccurate and unfair, but from my observation, and granted that observation is that I've had little to do with product-based businesses. Mm-hmm. I do think that it's harder in a service-based business to kind of establish a really compelling story and brand that motivates people to engage with it. I think in consumer products that maybe is a little bit easier to really focus in on people's passions, mm-hmm. and things that they really are emotional and care about. Mm-hmm. But just for me, for example, for the first decade or so of being in this business, Nexus IT, now a 22-year-old business, for the first decade or so, I just I'm an introvert. Like, mm-hmm. this is not my natural element. Being on screen with you, here live on the internet, this is not my natural element. For the first decade, I was happy to be behind the scenes, be the quiet guy who, was kind of pulling the triggers and the strings and making things happen, but not really give a face to the business. And I began to understand how severely that was hampering the business, and how the shift has happened in the market to where people don't want to do business with faceless businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've made a significant concerted effort over the past decade or so to really establish our brand and give the business a face, not just not just a logo, but actual individuals who are part of that story, right, and that people can engage with. And certainly it's paid in dividends, without any question whatsoever for us. It's not easy, and particularly when, again, this kind of stuff isn't my natural element, and most of our team, it's not. Most technical people are fairly introverted. Engineers are generally fairly introverted, so it's not our natural element, but it's definitely paid off to stretch ourselves, and really try to give a compelling story and faces to our brand. Good, great information, Dan. This has been great. I've got tons of notes.
And that to me brings up kind of a good question as well. And I find that, and you've mentioned, like, there's certainly you have a personal brand, and of who you are. And then I feel like I've known you longer maybe than you've known me, because I followed you on LinkedIn, and you do a very good job of kind of commenting and just having a public appearance, which has been consistent. Knowing you in person, knowing you through social media channels and everything else, it is very consistent. So it's true, it's authentic. But at the same time, I know for a lot of businesses, like with TechMat, for example, if Dan Beck was the TechMat brand, I feel like it would have been harder to sell. And so I guess, maybe for a service-based business, that's always going to be a challenge, because they're relying on you and your trust and your leadership. But there's always kind of that fine line of how much of this is a personal brand versus, like, does Nexus IT have its own, is it its own entity, or is it just an extension of you? Because that certainly has a big impact on, really kind of like what the possible exit strategy is for the business, or the long-term vision. So I'd be curious if that's something that you've thought about much, or how you've had to, kind of address that.
100%. And that's been a really interesting challenge and journey to figure out the right balance, because you're absolutely right. And in fact, if the business brand is your personal brand, you're going to run into massive problems scaling the business. Yeah. And you're going to run into, problems of, perception of the business. If you're trying to move upstream in the market, and larger businesses look at you as your business is one individual, you are the brand, you are the business, when you have a team of, 20 or 30 or 50 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So yes, particularly in a service-based business, you have to figure out the right balance of. I do think that in today's world, like, businesses need leaders who are visible to the public, right? But there needs to be enough distinction between your personal brand and the business brand, and what the differences are there, or you will run into significant, problems of market perception and scalability. And yes, certainly if you're looking at exit strategies and stuff like that. Really, really good that you've keyed in on that. And I wouldn't say that we've found the perfect balance as of yet. It's something that we're always striving for, and it's something I'm always concerned about is, do people, because I've tried to be to create a strong personal presence, on the internet and social media beyond the brand presence, right? Yeah. I've been very cognizant of, and concerned about, do people distinguish adequately between me and the business, right? Mm-hmm. And I hope that's the case. Still working on it.
Yeah, and I think at the same time, though, there's also a lot of kind of capital in that personal brand. Like, think of Tesla, and from like some of the stuff that they've done in the SEC regulations and everything else, that company gets away with a lot. And I feel like a lot of that valuation is tied to Elon Musk, and not necessarily the company itself. Yeah. And that certainly wouldn't be possible if you had somebody else running the company. So I think that it can be highly strategic, but also, at some point in time, if you don't do a good job of like, kind of either transitioning or somehow passing on a lot of that brand value on to whatever it is you're building, then as soon as you step away, it can it'll deflate. And so it's I think that's probably the biggest challenge, and maybe more so again for a service-based business where there's not a tangible product that it looks the same whether I'm sending it or some other company is sending it. When services is very much tied to the individual, I could see how that's it's a big challenge.
Yeah, 100%. And particularly in your younger years as an organization, when you're smaller and there's only a few team members and that kind of stuff, I mean, people get really attached,
Yeah.
to specific team members, and that still happens as you scale and you grow. Like businesses and people get attached to certain people, and it's always a challenge to kind of figure out how to help people understand that they can trust an entire team,
Yeah.
an entire brand, an entire system, an entire process, not just one specific individual. So tell us a little bit, Dan, about from like idea to launch. You've had several launches here. What does your turnaround time look like on that, and what is maybe some of your process of developing the brand before you actually take it to market?
Yeah. So it's varied. I mean, like 3V Gear was more of a kind of a reactive start, meaning that I'd actually been distributing somebody else's brand and had built up quite a presence for them and done really well marketing their product to the point that I basically created my own competition. And at that point, I realized it's like, why am I working so hard to build somebody else's brand? Let me build my own. And so that one, got spun up in just a matter of weeks, and I had a lot of visibility into what potential sales would look like and everything else. And I think probably as a kind of an analysis or looking at this from like a kind of a case view, I would say Renova Water and Hydro Blue, the water filter companies, were a really good case study in terms of like starting and building a business. And for me, that I was kind of exposed to that problem. I had a kind of like a flash sale site. It was called Deal Sergeant, where I would just buy large closeout items and I'd sell them at just ridiculous prices. And that gave me a lot of market visibility into what sold well. And whenever I sold different water filters, they always did really well. But a lot of the feedback came back as, I'm looking for a filter that does this, this, and this. And there just wasn't anything that had kind of that feature set that a lot of people were looking for. And so I kind of started to look into it more and understand, hey, there's a gap. How do I bridge that gap? And in developing a water filter, it was very, very, very expensive. And so a lot of times when I look at, when I'm looking at building a brand or a product or a business, I'm trying to assess both, the potential outcome as well as the risk that I'm exposing myself to. And, when we developed Renova Water, the tooling cost for that product, because of the piece count and everything else, it was well over $100,000. And then on top of that, all the product development that went into it, the testing and identifying and sourcing filter mediums and developing proprietary technology, it was very expensive, probably $250,000. I wanted to have exposure to that market and see, more, again, I guess, complete that feedback loop before I made that level of commitment. And so I found something else that got me 70% of what I wanted. So I found some other, filter that was largely in line with kind of my overall vision. It was something being made, overseas. I basically branded it as my own, made some, kind of changes to it so it could be my own unique product, and sold that for about 1.5 years to really realize, okay, there is a market opportunity here. And that led me to take that $250,000 commitment to develop the tools and really go full cycle in terms of product development. And not every business has to be that way. A lot of times you can go on AliExpress and find something that fits a very particular niche that is an opportunity that some large brand is missing out on, and really leverage that. Use that as leverage to enter a market that might be kind of difficult to penetrate, to where you find just one product and you sell that, you develop it, and just one thing leads to another. And so for me, like to that kind of product development, because I took a much more, I could have gone out and raised some capital and tried to execute within a year, but because I took a slower approach to it and I wanted to have a little bit more exposure to the market, it took about 2 years to fully launch. And I think for a lot of people, that's a much easier, like if you've got kind of, and I always love talking to like friends and neighbors, like I've got this product idea I've always wanted to develop. And like my number one thing is just do it, figure out a way to do it. Even if you find something that's a big compromise from what that product should be, buy that and sell it, just so you can start to get that feedback loop, so you can start to get exposure to market and also see if entrepreneurship is something for you. And so I'm always about trying to find the path of least resistance into a market. And one of the best ways to do that, so if I wanted to get into IT consulting, for example, I'd probably go out and try to find somebody that is really good at IT, but not great at selling themselves, and just say, hey, let me sell your service for you. And so I can kind of package myself as like an IT consulting agency or IT services, but really somebody else is handling the fulfillment for me. So I would contend that in the product-based space and the service-based space, there are ways of getting into and starting a brand or starting a business that requires very little risk or very little investment. Even buying, kitting, I think is another great thing. It's like if you're really into, let's say, kiteboarding or whatever, going out and building, not just the obvious products, the core products, but the lifestyle products, what I call the before and after of that kiteboarding experience, and selling those to the kiteboarding crowd. And so to me, I feel like there's a lot of ways of getting into an industry through, kind of side or back doors, if you will.
Yeah, man, that's so smart. That's so smart. So many entrepreneurs, and particularly probably newer entrepreneurs, think, like you, they look at, okay, I want to develop this water filter, and it's going to cost me $250,000. So I'm going to have to go figure out how to raise that capital. Is that friends and family? Do I get an angel investor? Can I get, somebody who believes enough, to give me $250,000 to do my R&D, to develop the product, and so often, something that's close enough exists. Granted, there's some pains, with when you're outsourcing some of, either your products or services. There's some pains to that, and that's a reality. But that's a reality of starting businesses as well. You got to start somewhere, and sometimes you got to start with the path of least resistance. What's going to be quickest, easiest to address a challenge, a problem in the market, and then develop the products and services as you continue to create revenue and profits, right? Really, really, really wise words there.
Well, and I'd say even to go a step further, I think a lot of the time, there's times that I've developed products, and when I look at, I always try to take a very market-based approach to developing a product or a service or a solution. And I look at what is reasonable for the market to bear. What does the market want to bear? Like, what's the ideal price point? And then I try to back into that. And so some of the time I might be selling something. I try not to sell anything at a loss, but there's times that I'm selling something and I'm barely breaking even, knowing that once I reach a certain level of scale and volume, that I start to enjoy economies of scale, that I can begin to value engineer. So for me, the focus is first and foremost, find something that the market wants at a price point that the market wants, and then develop that. And over time, where you can focus on building some efficiencies and really building a better business is in reducing the cost to deliver whatever it is that you're delivering to the market. And so, there's a lot of different ways, kind of theories and ways of developing, cost for service and products. But for me, more common than anything, in the businesses that I've built, has been a market-based approach where I go and look at and analyze, here's what is in the market, here's what, with feedback, here's what people are willing to pay for this product or service, and then let me figure out how to deliver that. And that's really, I feel like, what we've done with 401Go. And so when you look at like our price point to offer a small business a 401k solution, we're 60% less expensive. Now, the typical industry approach is, hey, they're all willing to pay X, let's make our product X minus 10% or X minus 20%. And instead, we just said, let's go in and figure out what businesses can afford, what's reasonable, and look at this from a market-based perspective. And that's what we did, in order to determine our pricing and what we've had to do. We've had to do fundraising, so we're venture backed in order to to build the solution. So that's not always feasible because we need to have a certain size, to reach critical mass that it becomes profitable. But I think a lot of the time, if you start first with the market and fulfilling a pain point and worry less about how much you're going to make, that you'll win. It's more of a long-term play. Whereas oftentimes people are like, well, I'm not going to make enough money, I don't want to do that. And I always, my thought is that can come later. I think Ford's the perfect example. For the first, several decades that they were making, Ford automobiles, in subsequent years, they would actually cut the price of vehicles. Like that doesn't happen anymore. They'd find out how to make a vehicle for a lot less, and they would in turn sell it for a lot less. So their pricing was more because there wasn't a big market out there for automobiles. They kind of had to build their own demand and create their own market. They took more of a cost-based approach to it. But I do like the fact that they came in, and even though people were willing to pay X for a car, they said, no, we can deliver it for half that price. And that's exactly what they did. And because of it, they created their own market. They built market and demand that previously wasn't there.
Yeah, there are definitely types of businesses that their volumes and economies of scale games. And there are types of businesses that aren't, right? Regardless of the type, I would also caution people to always think about, you have to think about profitability. You have to think about, healthy margins. If that's not a problem you solve earlier on in your venture, it's probably a problem that's going to haunt you throughout your venture. Like no amount of capital or money in the world can, can completely solve a profitability problem. If you're selling your products or services cheaper than you can supply them for, you've got a problem and you have to figure it out. And sometimes, the market's not going to bear what it's worth, right? And sometimes you have to figure out how do we address what the market is willing to pay for this, and and provide a product or service that is of a quality that we are comfortable with, at a price that the market will bear. So I know you wanted to talk a little bit about signaling and subtext. What that all means and how it plays a part in branding. So let's dig into that. We don't have a ton of time left, but let's dig into that for a couple minutes.
Yeah. So, I think for maybe kind of a story to explain that. So I've got a good buddy, he's Italian. He immigrated to the US just a couple of years ago. And we're actually partners in a business where we import, architectural products, which we sell into, really kind of high-end residential markets. So he's having on a daily basis interactions with, very well-off architects and, famous architects and interior designers, wealthy homeowners. And, everything about what that company does is very Italian. And he would always show up in a convertible Mustang. So, his dream, for Italians coming to the U.S., like the iconic vehicle is a Mustang. And so he wanted to drive a Mustang, but, finally this year I convinced him to get something that's a little bit more, appropriate for the brand and some of that signaling and that subtext. And now he shows up in an Alfa Romeo. So to me, like that's part of, again, just being consistent throughout. It's one of those things that, nobody is necessarily consciously making a decision that when they see Mauro show up in a convertible Mustang, that nope, not going to buy from this company. They don't know what they're talking about. This isn't Italian. Nobody's making that conscious decision, but there is a subconscious effect that it has in their overall impression of the company. And really what it comes down to, it's the sum total of those, subconscious, the signaling, the subtext that really makes up the brand. And so it's the way that you dress. It's it's your appearance. It's the way that you answer the phone. It's your business card. It's everything. And I think too many people, they say, oh, we're in the paper business, and that's all they think about, or we're in, this type of business, and they don't think about all the other aspects that really signal what your brand and what your values are. And so I think the subtext, there's a lot of studies that go into that. So it's like, the Prius was one of the very, the first very successful hybrid automobiles. And at the same time, Honda came out with some competitors. but they look like normal cars. And so, those effectively didn't do a good job of signaling to other consumers kind of this conspicuous consumption, concept that, me driving a Prius probably has more to do with signaling to my neighbors and my coworkers that I care about the environment than, to the extent that I really care about the look of that vehicle. And so that's got to be built into, the products and everything that is you're doing. And so, in a way, it's, like in your business, it's a way of saying, well, we really care about, our people and our security and everything. That's why we have Nexus IT. And so there's ways of extending the brand value beyond just what it is you're doing. And I think a lot of that comes down to that signaling and that subtext.
Yeah. Really, it incorporates as well, with the language you use, the verbiage, and I'm not a huge proponent of scripting, like, overly. I realize at some scale, some organizations, like and you have call centers and stuff like that, you can't get away from, some fairly specific scripts, right? But I like our clients' interaction to be somewhat individualized, to not be robotic, to have, true human, authentic interaction. But at the same time, you have, you incorporate ideals and philosophies and values and verbiage and language, that kind of is cohesive across the entire client experience, from the moment that they reach out and ask about, a product or service, engage in a sales conversation, to the fulfillment of that and onboarding and whatever that entire customer journey is, right? If that whole experience is cohesive, it all just lends and contributes to the brand, right? And particularly if obviously it supports the brand and what you're trying to deliver. We've just got a couple of minutes left here. This is a really good question, and maybe if we can spend 2 minutes and then we'll just kind of wrap up, Dan. But do branding practices change when you're selling products and services, and if so, how?
I think the tactics do, the principles don't. So when you're, for a product, for Forseti Steel, that's kind of another interesting story where when we first started selling that product, I was focused more on just making it as available as possible. So we'd sell, a knife for about, $50 to $60. And when it would show up, it was wrapped in, plastic, in a cardboard box and everything. But, what we were essentially selling was Damascus steel is a process, of steel making that's 3,000 years old. And it shows up in like these modern packaging materials. So we said, no, we've got to reinvent the way that we deliver this product. So now if you were to buy one, it shows up in a nice wood box with wood shavings in there, and basically materials that would have been available 3,000 years ago. And we tried to recreate that kind of heritage experience. And so from a product-based standpoint, like that's really easy to scale, in terms of delivery and everything else. But from a service-based standpoint, and you bring up a good point, it's how do you make sure that values are being communicated and that brand is being communicated. And it's through conversations on the phone, it's through emails and everything else, without it coming across as fake or scripted. And I think that really comes down to, in a lot of ways, like hiring decisions. Are you hiring people that support the values of that brand? And again, this is a way that brand, and marketing extends beyond just a function of sales or revenue growth, and goes into even hiring practices. Like, are these employees Nexus IT level employees? Do they care about do they care about the client? So I think that's probably the biggest, differentiator is between the two.
Yeah, definitely. And I can definitely speak to that in a service-based business. You when you vet candidates, you have to vet them. Do they carry themselves the way that we do? Do they in general, I mean, we don't want them to be replicas of us, but, do they express themselves and speak in a similar manner? Do they hold similar core values? Do they, or what is important to us? Is it important to them? And, ultimately, that client experience, is it super important to them? Yeah. And if so, then, they're probably the right fit. If there are significant deviations there, then they probably aren't, no matter how qualified or educated they are. If they don't, if their demeanor and way they carry themselves, it doesn't support the brand, then they're probably not the right fit for your organization. So Dan, we're about out of time here. I want to thank you so much, my friend, for joining me for this hour. This has been a ton of fun. I've learned a ton. I've got a ton of notes that I've taken here. I hope that the crowd has learned a lot. I do think that has been the case. We want to thank everybody for joining us here today. Just a quick reminder to keep a look, keep an eye out for announcements for the upcoming segments of Tech Beat with Josh Weber, Christy Holt, and Stephanie Page. Go follow myself and Dan Beck on LinkedIn and our brands 401Go and Nexus IT. We'd be happy to interact in any manner. If you have additional questions or comments, reach out to us. Dan's a great guy. I appreciate you again. We've got some comments coming in. Great session and everything. So thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day, everybody. We're signing off.